In this lesson, we will see how to update WooCommerce, WooCommerce plugins, themes, WordPress the right way. Specifically, we will see what is an update actually, why updating and keeping your website up to date, the different kinds of updates, also when you should update and how often, and finally the 6 steps on how to update a WooCommerce site if you have staging within your hosting, if you don't. And this is super helpful, and we will also add a second video to this lesson with a demo so you can see practically what I do whenever I update my own WooCommerce site. First of all, so what is an update? Well, an update to me is a new release of WordPress or your theme or a plugin that might contain what? Bug fixes, very important, enhancements like performance, maybe new features, and also super important, security hole patches. So whenever an update contains something urgent like a security fix, then you have to update ASAP. Why should you update? Well, for the same exact reasons. If you keep your site up to date, you reduce the risk of breaking your site. You also reduce the risk of being hacked because hackers have less backdoors to get into your website. You can also improve performance if the update was about improving speed and how things are loaded in the back end. And finally, you can, of course, and hopefully remove conflicts, remove bugs. But please note, if you go and update something, you might also create new conflicts. So you have to be very careful and make sure you update on staging first. We will see that later. What are the different kinds of updates? Well, just to remember that an update, so we're talking about WordPress core, talking about the WooCommerce plugin, talking about a theme, another random plugin. An update can include changes to files and or changes to your database. So if it's a file change, it could be a new PHP function, maybe some fixed CSS or some JavaScript, new addition, whatever it is, that's a file change. Also, there could be a major or minor database change. For example, a new database table, replacing a database table name, which usually is not very common. You have to be very careful. So it is important to talk about files and or database because backing up your files is never sufficient. So you have to back up files and database before updating, and so you can restore a backup from an old date. There are also different kinds of updates based on what the changelog is. For example, there could be a bug fix. This means that you have to update ASAP because that's fixing something that is actually running on your current website. It could be an enhancement, so something new, something that goes faster, and that means that if you update soon, then your website will perform better. Or maybe there is a new feature, like for example WordPress admin or WooCommerce admin or WooCommerce analytics. Well, you have to update in this case without any rush and update when and if needed, and you can even wait for it. If there is a security patch, on the other hand, then you have to update ASAP because that's giving a backdoor or a reason to hackers so they can get in to your WooCommerce site. Also, you have to remember that each update is unique and differs from the previous ones, and that's because of the version number. So we would classify updates, according to me, as minor, major, and key updates. A minor update is when the last number, the last figure inside that version numbering changes. So for example, you go from 4.7.4 to 4.7.5. That would be a small fix, something that shouldn't really break your website. Then we've got major updates. As you can see, that's when the second number, the second figure changes. So you go from 4.7.5 to 4.8.0. So that's when a new functionality, especially in WooCommerce, is shipped. For example, whenever the new shipping zone system was released, I think back then was 2.6.0, if I'm not wrong. Doesn't matter. What matters is that what changed was the middle number, and that's a major update. So you have to be super careful with those ones, as well as the key updates. The key updates is when the first number changes. So that's a huge new version, a brand new experience. For example, in 5.0.0, WooCommerce included the WooCommerce admin plugin into core. So the new WooCommerce software was released, and that's a big thing that definitely requires a lot of testing before implementing the upgrade. So we get to when we should update. Well, first of all, we should update when we see updates available. You can see that from the little notices under each plugin, themes, WordPress, and so on. So you will definitely know about them and when they're available. The thing is that you have to pay a lot of attention, because some premium plugins, so we're not talking about wp.org plugins and themes, we're talking about premium software that you go and buy on some website, they might not always show the notice. So it depends how they're coded, and depends how they're integrated with the WordPress notification system for updates. So not always what you see on the WordPress dashboard is true. And sometimes you have to check the changelog of your premium pieces of software in order to make sure that there is an available update, and that you have to maybe download the plugin from that website again and upload it to your WordPress site again. So not always the WordPress admin notices are sufficient. So for example, you should check the change logs. This is an example for WooCommerce plugin. So you have to really read what each update is about. They might contain fixes, they might contain improvements for devs, they might contain security patches. So you really have to read everything about it. And if you can, and if the plugin, theme, etc. has a blog with release notes, then you should definitely follow that blog and receive the release notes directly into your inbox, same way as I do with the WooCommerce plugin. So I'm always the first to know what's going on with each release without having to log into my WordPress site. Now, when should you really update? Well, we already said if it's a security patch, then you should really fix immediately and update immediately, at least that plugin only. I'm not talking about all the other plugins, themes, and core. I'm talking about fixing the specific plugin which had a security hole in it. If it's a minor, so if it's the last figure changing, so from 4.7.5 to 4.7.6, then you can update really anytime. If it's major, Then we're talking about something quite big. It's not a key update, but it's still a big update. So whenever the 0.0 version comes out, you will see that after a few days, the 0.1, 0.2 version will come out. That's because theme developers and plugins that depend on WooCommerce in this case will need to adapt, might find bugs with 4.8.0, so they have to contact WooCommerce and tell them, listen, this is not working, you have to update this function. So there will be sort of a smaller earthquakes after the big one, and you should wait for the next releases before updating. This is an example. For the WooCommerce plugin, you can see that the 3.0.0 plugin version was released on the 4th of April 2017. And look at that storm of smaller earthquakes after the big release. 2 days after the 0.1 version is released, 8 days after the 0.2, and 9 days 0.3, and less than 3 weeks away the 0.4, and finally within the same month a 0.5 version of WooCommerce. So the 3.0 was a big, major, actually a key update, and of course it caused a lot of secondary issues that they need to be fixed by WooCommerce itself after all theme and plugin developers were reporting bugs, and therefore you would have done better waiting until the end of the month before updating WooCommerce, because at that stage all problems had been fixed. Another problem with major WooCommerce updates, but with any major plugin and theme and core updates, is the tested up to thing. So whenever you have a major version available in WooCommerce especially, you go to your WordPress admin and you will see a pink window like this, a pink notification. It'll say, heads up, these following plugins that are relying on WooCommerce, such as Give Products, Product Add-ons, Stripe Gateway, have only been tested up to this given WooCommerce version. So if you update to 3.0.0, if you update to 3.1.2, like in this case, all these plugins that are relying on the old WooCommerce will basically create potential bugs because they've only been tested up to WooCommerce 2.6.0. So I'm already creating potential problems by being on 3.0. So you see how it is important that you should update WooCommerce when all the other dependencies, all the other things that depend on WooCommerce are compatible with that given version and have been tested with that given version and no bugs have been reported. This is because plugin and theme developers may be slow to adapt to a new WooCommerce version. Maybe they don't have a team like Automatic has with dozens and dozens of developers. Maybe it's a one-person band looking after a plugin, and of course time is needed to adapt to a new WooCommerce version. Same thing, not only when to update, but also how often you should update. Well, not all WooCommerce sites are equal. It's important to say that. We already said that if there is a security patch, you shouldn't update immediately. Otherwise, I think sticking with a monthly regular update schedule might help. These monthly updates should give you the time to test. So before you actually update your live website, you have to be 1,000 times more careful, which means that you have to test on staging, update on staging, testing if the staging site is working, and only then update your live site. So you will need at least 1 hour a month just to do this operation. Now, let's take a look at the 6 steps to update a WooCommerce site. First of all, should the update be done manually or automatically? Well, you already know that by default WordPress updates itself. Some plugins now do too if you enable it from the dashboard. The other alternative is that you do a one-click or a bulk click upgrade via the WordPress admin. You can even, if you didn't know, update plugins and themes with FTP. So you simply replace the folder, download the folder, upload it via FTP, and basically replace the plugin, and that would actually update the plugin. You have to be sure, of course, that updates are done on the staging environment first. I put a note there, hands up who's guilty, because time is money. Of course, in my past, not always I did updates on staging and tested them there because I was in a rush, so I did it on the live environment straight away. That's because I knew they were just minor. That's because I knew I could restore a backup. So I'm talking about testing the major updates always on staging, which are absolutely vital, and you should definitely testing. My hosting has no staging. Well, you should really change hosting, because that's a feature worth a lot of money, mostly for big websites, for WooCommerce sites that convert a lot of sales and have a lot of traffic. Really, if you have no staging, that's a big problem with your hosting and a potential issue with troubleshooting and errors in the future for your WooCommerce site. If you really have no staging, we will see a little FTP trick for updating plugins and themes. So what are the 6 steps? First of all, you should disable automatic updates. We will see that shortly and why. Then you create a backup point. You create your staging, so your clone website. You do a bulk update right there and test if the website works. You do not push the whole staging site to live, because you could override something that happened in the last few minutes, like orders or new users or posts gone live. So you simply re-update and retest the live site, and if something fails and something happens, you can always restore the backup that you created previously. So how do you disable and why to disable automatic updates? Of course, the more traffic and sales your WooCommerce site has, the more issues can arise after you update, even if you do minor updates. The problem with WordPress is that its core automatically updates for security reasons. But if you add this line to your wp-config file of your WordPress install, you will disable the automatic updates of WordPress itself. And you can definitely test this core update on staging before it's done automatically. So this is important to know. You shouldn't really allow for automatic updates, no matter if it's core, WooCommerce, other plugins or themes, because things can break. So you need to really test each update once it's released. At this stage, once you've disabled once and for all automatic updates, you can create a backup restore point. Now, your hosting should be good enough and should create automated backups each day already. The problem is that we need to create an on-demand backup, so a backup done right now. In this way, if something goes wrong in the next 15 minutes, you can restore this backup with one click. It's nice also if the hosting gave you the chance of renaming this backup point. So I can, and I usually say, backup before updating WooCommerce to 4.8 or something like that. In this way, I know exactly which is the backup that I need to restore in the next few minutes if something goes wrong. At this stage, right, of course, this is an example of my control panel in my hosting. I just go on to take backup now, and this will create a backup restore point for me so that I can go ahead and update. At this stage, I create my clone. So I'm going to duplicate my live website with a one-click staging functionality of my hosting. In this way, I can go and update everything on the staging side without worrying about the live users. So users are still happily surfing my website, watching the lessons and so on. In the meanwhile, I am on another copy of my website doing updates and testing. Okay, so at this way, at this stage, I can basically bulk update everything on staging without worrying about which one should be updated first. So this is how I go onto my hosting control panel, go onto the staging management section and copy data from live to staging so that I know that the staging is containing the latest and the current website data, and I can go and finally update the whole website and test. Now, I say bulk update here because you're on staging. Otherwise, I wouldn't say that. So staging also give you the choice of doing anything you like. If you break the staging site, nothing will happen. So you can definitely here do whatever you like, do all the bulk operations you prefer, and even update the database if it's a major plugin update, and if you have a notification on top saying you need to update the WooCommerce database. In relation to the test that you should do, well, you should take a look once you've updated everything, and I mean not only free plugins and free themes and WordPress core, also the premium versions of your plugins. So if the notification doesn't appear on the dashboard, you have to download the plugin and upload it through FTP. Once that's done, you have to test at least the home page, the shop page, the cart page, so the add to cart process, the checkout page, and of course, you have to place an order. So you have to get to the thank you page and then take a look at the single order via the admin dashboard and see if everything is okay. If something goes wrong, well, it means that there is a conflict. It means that there might be an error. And this way, you have to skip to module 3 and 4 of these course and start some troubleshooting. If all goes well on the other side, well, you can go ahead and update and test your live environment. This is an example of how I bulk update plugins. I'm on staging, there is no problem. This is the WordPress database notification that there is an update required for the database. And of course, if staging works, now I can move on to step 5. I prefer not to override the live site with my staging site. So it's the opposite as before. Earlier on, we copied data from live to staging. There is an operation or function you can do to copy staging to live. So usually this is done, or this should be done after you've updated everything, after you've tested that WooCommerce works. I tend not to do that because in the meanwhile that I've done this staging, creation, update, and testing, in the meanwhile, my live website has converted orders, has new users, maybe a new scheduled post went live or a newsletter triggered. So if I overwrite my live site with a staging site, I will lose all this data, all these database entries. So what I do is I never push, which is the same as override, my live site with staging. What I do is I go back to my live site and re-bulk update everything. And what I say here is, Smile, it worked on staging already. So that's only why I'm bulk updating. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a good idea to do that. And of course, I go and retest my live install again. So once again, the home page, the shop page, the add to cart, the checkout, and a payment. If you don't do that, you risk that your website is going to break. If you've tested everything on live and you notice a big checkout bug or the homepage layout is all messed up, then you might need more time to troubleshoot. Staging went well. Why is the live website not working after updating the exact same plugins? Maybe you have a cache issue, which is the only difference between staging and live environment. So if something goes wrong, I recommend that you restore the previous on-demand backup that you created 10-15 minutes ago. Then you create another staging, and at that stage you take more time to find out what's going on with your updates. What are the PHP errors? What are the JS conflicts? What are the display errors caused by the CSS, is HTML? So in this way you need more time. So when I say 15 minutes, this is when things go well. If things go wrong, then you will need more time. So it is very important that you understand these 6 steps for your long-term success. I said earlier that you can also update your website if you don't have staging. I mean, sure, you can always clone your website with duplicator plugin, for example, and create a copy and update everything in there. The problem is this is very time consuming. So a good way to update a live website could be with an FTP trick. So you download, for example, the new WooCommerce plugin version on your computer. You go and upload this new plugin version to the plugins folder, but you rename the new WooCommerce plugin with new, or with, I don't know, WooCommerce 4.8.0, something that is different from the existing plugin folder name, which is WooCommerce. At this stage, if you want to try the update without deleting the old version, you simply do this. You rename the current plugin version to old WooCommerce, for example, and you remove the new label from your new WooCommerce or from your WooCommerce 4.8 plugin folder. In this way, you're basically temporarily switching version, and you can test on the live website if you really have no staging, which, once again, I will repeat this forever. It is a vital hosting feature that you should have to avoid all this mess. So this is just a workaround that will just work once and then will break your site another 10. So you have to be super careful. But by doing this little FTP trick, you can even update plugins and themes without having staging. Now, if you don't even have FTP access, well, you can really work on a WordPress WooCommerce site anyway. So FTP is your last resource. You need the ability to troubleshoot and to update WooCommerce WordPress from outside of the WordPress dashboard. And that's why I'm talking about staging. That's why I'm talking about FTP. If you do everything with just your WordPress admin dashboard credentials and something breaks, you can't log in again, or you can't find out what the errors are. So FTP is absolutely vital to have. So let's finish this long lesson and say that whenever you update a WooCommerce site, no matter if it's a new site, if it's a busy site, you have to keep not one but 2 eyes on changelogs. You have to set a regular, maybe monthly maintenance schedule so you can reduce risks. And your hosting must come with staging, must come with one click, on demand, backup restore points, and you have to have FTP or SFTP access, otherwise you can't even work on a WordPress site. You have to remember that whenever you do updates, you have to test the full process. So from the home page until payment, otherwise it is not a test. And you have to remember that in the following days of a huge WooCommerce update, I haven't said this yet, you have to be available for customer support, for maybe bug reports. So that means never update a website on a Friday afternoon, and always do that on a Monday or Tuesday, so you know that you will be available in the next few days if something else that you haven't that you didn't test is going to happen. So hopefully you now know how to update a WordPress WooCommerce site the right way, and by doing so you can avoid all your problems. And if you do things right, then the troubleshooting time will be really reduced to almost zero, because everything is working before you actually release the updates on the live website.